Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we will explore the Planck Limit, uncovering the terrifying secret at the bottom of the universe. Bring your awareness to your own physical body. Feel the weight of your hands resting in your lap, the solid pressure of the earth supporting your frame, and the heavy, continuous reality of the environment that surrounds you. When we interact with the physical world, we are enveloped in a profound, deeply convincing sensation of stability. We run our fingers across the surface of a wooden table or the cold, unyielding edge of a piece of metal, and our nervous system instantly reports back a story of absolute solidity. We inherently believe that the world is a continuous, unbroken fabric of matter. We assume that reality is smooth, tightly packed, and structurally sound, extending from the vast, sprawling landscapes of our planet down to the microscopic building blocks of our flesh. This perception of a dense, uninterrupted existence is the very foundation of human sanity. It is the unquestioned stage upon which we play out the entire drama of our lives, the solid ground upon which we build our homes, our philosophies, and our absolute trust in the laws of nature. We never doubt the ground beneath our feet, because to doubt its solidity is to invite a paralyzing, existential vertigo into our daily waking consciousness. The human mind demands a universe that makes intuitive sense. We crave boundaries, edges, and defined surfaces. When two objects collide, we hear the sharp, sudden sound of the impact, and we interpret it as a fundamental truth of physics. Solid matter cannot pass through solid matter. We observe the heavy, predictable mechanics of our daily lives and extrapolate them across the entire cosmos, deeply assuming that the universe, at every possible scale, is constructed from hard, finite, and tangible materials. We view ourselves as monolithic, impenetrable entities, moving through a world populated by equally impenetrable things. The air we breathe feels like a fluid, the water we drink feels like a continuous stream, and the earth we walk upon feels like a permanent, unyielding foundation. This psychological architecture is so deeply embedded within our consciousness that we mistake our localized, biological sensory experience for the absolute objective truth of the cosmos. We confuse the map for the territory, blindly trusting that the smooth, rendered image our brain provides is an exact replica of the physical universe. But this profound sensation of solidity is not a fundamental truth of reality. It is a magnificent, highly sophisticated, biological hallucination. It is an arrogant, localized delusion, a necessary lie that our brains are constantly, desperately telling us simply so we do not go entirely mad. The human nervous system did not evolve to understand the ultimate raw physics of the cosmos. It evolved in a brutal, terrestrial environment where survival depended exclusively on macroscopic pattern recognition. Our ancestors needed to know the exact distance to a predator, the weight of a stone, and the structural integrity of the branches they climbed. To survive, the brain had to become a ruthless, hyper-efficient engine of simplification. It learned to aggressively filter out the overwhelming, chaotic, and terrifyingly complex data stream of the true universe, compressing it into a smooth, manageable, and entirely fictional user interface. The solidity you feel when you press your hands together is nothing more than the repulsive force of electromagnetic fields pushing against one another in the dark, translated by your brain into the comforting sensation of touch. There is no actual contact. There is no true solidity. The brain simply cannot process the paralyzing reality that you are fundamentally composed of empty space and ghostly vibrating forces. and so it completely edits that information out of your consciousness. If the biological safeguards of your perception were suddenly removed, and your mind was forced to process the raw, unfiltered data of the physical world, your sanity would be violently, instantaneously obliterated. To see the true nature of matter would be to look into an abyss of such staggering emptiness and chaotic vibration that the human identity could not sustain its shape. We are psychological creatures that require firm borders to define where our isolated self ends and where the external world begins. The Lie of Solidity provides that border. It is the heavy, psychological armor that protects our fragile consciousness from the roaring, unfathomable reality of the quantum void. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant assumption that our perception is superior, that our human scale is the default setting of existence. We treat the smooth, continuous world as a divine right, completely oblivious to the fact that we are living inside a highly curated, heavily censored sensory simulation generated by our own terrified biology. We are sleepwalkers, navigating a dream of absolute density, protected from the terrifying truth of our own emptiness by the very limitations of our physical form. Tonight, we must actively choose to strip away this comforting armor. We must intentionally bypass the biological filters that have kept us safe and sane, and begin a terrifying intellectual descent into the dark. Imagine piercing the smooth, continuous illusion of your own skin, diving downward into the microscopic architecture of your cells. As we abandon the macroscopic world, the comforting density of reality immediately begins to thin. We fall past the twisting, heavy ladders of your DNA, plunging into the silent, cold domain of the molecules. Here, the illusion of a tightly packed universe starts to violently fracture. The structures become sparse, separated by vast, unbridgeable gulfs of freezing nothingness. We continue our descent, falling relentlessly toward the atomic foundation, expecting to finally hit the solid, indivisible bedrock of existence. But the bedrock does not exist. As we enter the architecture of the atom, we do not find hard, spherical building blocks. We find a terrifying hollow cathedral. The nucleus, the supposed heavy anchor of matter, is a microscopic speck completely lost in a sprawling, lightless void, surrounded by the jittering, unpredictable ghosts of electrons that refuse to occupy a definitive physical space. The descent does not stop at the atom. We push deeper, violently tearing past the protons and neutrons, diving into the hyper-violent, chaotic realm of the quarks. The sheer, suffocating emptiness of the universe becomes absolute. The solid matter that you believed constituted your body, your world, and your entire reality is revealed to be less than a fraction of a percent of actual substance. You are almost entirely made of nothing. But even this terrifying realization of emptiness is not the final truth. As we plunge past the quarks, leaving behind all recognizable concepts of mass and matter, we approach the absolute, fundamental fabric of space-time itself. We are heading toward a threshold where the concept of empty space ceases to be a quiet, peaceful void. We are diving toward the ultimate, unyielding limit of the cosmos, a place where the smooth, continuous geometry of our reality violently, catastrophically shatters. Down in the absolute dark, past the reach of human intuition and biological comfort, the foundation of the universe is not built upon solid ground. It is built upon a foundation of absolute, untamable terror. To quietly sit in the dark and fully surrender to the illusion of solidity is to undergo a profound, irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We assume that reality is a concrete, tangible architecture, inherently believing that physical information must possess weight, density, and absolute continuity to be considered real. We demand that the universe provide us with a solid foundation, but the raw, unyielding truth of the cosmos reveals that true, fundamental information is completely divorced from our biological need for stability. The macroscopic world you inhabit, the solid objects, the heavy ground, the unbroken skin of your own hands, is not a physical truth. It is a macroscopic data summary. It is a highly localized, deeply fragile interpretation of a reality that is fundamentally empty and wildly chaotic. The universe is a master of deception, beautifully hiding the terrifying, structureless abyss of its true nature beneath a comforting, sensory illusion. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, familiar weight of your own body, that you are entirely constructed from the void. You are a localized, highly structured pattern of empty space, dreaming of solidity. Find a deep, unshakable peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the physical world is merely a whisper, a temporary, beautiful ghost of information hovering perfectly over a roaring, unfathomable dark, and that the solid ground you walk upon is the greatest, most merciful lie the universe has ever told. To understand the terrifying truth of our physical reality, we must first abandon the comforting, sunlit warmth of the macroscopic world. We must deliberately strip away the familiar, heavy sensory illusions that protect our fragile biological minds and begin a relentless, terrifying descent into the absolute dark. Imagine your consciousness completely detaching from the heavy breathing machinery of your body. You are no longer a physical entity walking upon the surface of the earth. You are a pure, isolated point of awareness, shrinking rapidly downward into the microscopic architecture of your own flesh. As you begin this mental descent, the familiar, comforting sensations of the human experience instantly begin to distort and violently fade. The ambient sounds of the room around you, the subtle friction of the air, the rhythmic, heavy beating of your own heart stretch into low, unrecognizable frequencies before evaporating entirely into a profound, suffocating silence. Color, a beautiful but entirely macroscopic phenomenon, dependent upon the chaotic bouncing of light waves, violently drains away. You are leaving behind the colorful, noisy simulation of human perception and entering a stark, lightless void of raw, unyielding physical data. As we shrink downward, we plummet first through the bustling, chaotic metropolis of our own biology. We drift through the soft, undulating walls of the living cell, witnessing a hyperactive, microscopic universe operating with terrifying, blind efficiency. We pass the massive, churning protein factories and dive deeply through the twisting, majestic, and heavily tightly wound spiral of the DNA double helix. This is the absolute basement of biology, the final microscopic frontier where the concept of life still holds any structural meaning. But we cannot remain in this warm, cooperative environment. We must push deeper. As we fall past these heavy molecular chains, we cross a terrifying, invisible threshold. The organized, breathing machinery of life violently ceases to exist. We have been completely severed from biology, entirely swallowed by the cold, unfeeling, and purely mechanical domain of raw physics. We are now falling rapidly toward the foundational building block of the physical world, the atom. In our comforting, terrestrial mythology, we are taught to picture the atom as a dense, microscopic solar system, a perfectly solid, heavy sphere of tangible matter. We deeply assume that when we reach the atomic level, we will finally rest upon the hard, indivisible bedrock of reality. But as we violently breach the outer boundary of the atom, this comforting architectural illusion completely and catastrophically shatters. We are not met with solid ground. We are met with an abyss. The atom is not a hard building block. It is a terrifyingly empty, silent, and sprawling vault. To even begin to comprehend the sheer, crushing magnitude of this atomic emptiness, your primate brain must stretch its capacity for visualization to the absolute breaking point. Imagine standing in the exact center of a massive, vaulted cathedral, a structure so unfathomably large that its walls disappear into the horizon, and you are plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. If the nucleus, the heavy, dense core of the atom, were a single, tiny, invisible grain of sand resting quietly on the floor in the exact center of that massive space, the outer walls of the cathedral would represent the outer boundaries of the atom itself. The unfathomable, lightless, and sprawling distance between that single grain of sand and those distant walls is completely, absolutely empty. It is a dead, screaming void. And yet, this terrifying empty space makes up more than 99.9% of the atom's volume. Because your entire physical body, the solid ground beneath your feet, and the heavy atmosphere you breathe are constructed entirely of atoms, you must confront the horrifying mathematical truth that you are almost entirely constructed from freezing, silent nothingness. Within this massive, empty vault, the electrons do not behave like solid, comforting moons orbiting a predictable planet. They are ghostly, jittering phantoms of pure probability. In the dark, silent gaps of the atom, the classical laws of motion violently break down. The electrons do not travel in smooth, continuous paths that the human mind can track. They smear across the dark, violently popping into and out of physical existence, existing everywhere and nowhere simultaneously in a chaotic, vibrating haze of statistical likelihood. They are invisible clouds of negative charge, teleporting wildly through the empty cathedral, creating a boundary of repulsive force that gives us the macroscopic illusion of solid touch. The heavy, continuous reality of your flesh is nothing more than these ghostly phantoms violently repelling the phantoms of other atoms, a delicate, vibrating dance occurring entirely over an unfathomable, empty dark. But our descent is not yet complete. We cannot linger in the ghostly, probabilistic halls of the electron. We must push even deeper, diving across the vast, dark, silent gap toward the incredibly tiny, impossibly dense heart of the atom, the nucleus. As we shrink down to confront the protons and the neutrons, the heavy, localized anchors of reality, we desperately expect to finally find the solid, indivisible core of matter. But the universe actively refuses to grant us the comfort of a solid foundation. As we violently penetrate the boundary of the proton, we reach the absolute edge of the known, the final, unyielding boundary of what standard microscopes and human intuition can possibly comprehend. Here, in the absolute deepest, darkest basement of the physical world, we find the fundamental particles, the quarks. We have reached a scale so incredibly small, so deeply buried in the fabric of the cosmos, that the very act of observation becomes a physical impossibility. Light itself, the waves of photons we use to illuminate, measure, and understand the universe, is simply too massive, too wide, and too clumsy to ever touch these entities. To attempt to look at a quark is to demand an answer from a reality that actively, physically refuses to be seen. The quarks do not possess recognizable shapes, they do not have hard edges, and they cannot be isolated. They are abstract, mathematical points of mass and electrical charge, permanently bound together by the strong nuclear force in a hyper-violent, inescapable, and perfectly silent dance. They are the absolute limit of the material world, the final, indivisible fragments of raw data before the concept of solid matter completely and irreversibly dissolves into pure mathematics. The human logic you rely upon, forged entirely in the macroscopic world of falling heavy objects and flowing water, screams in absolute terror and completely breaks down at this scale. The quarks are a realm of pure, unadulterated physics, where our biological intuition is not just useless, it is entirely, laughably wrong. To sit quietly in the heavy, crushing silence of the dark and fully absorb the terrifying reality of this microscopic descent is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that substance is the defining, absolute characteristic of existence. We equate mass with reality, deeply believing that the world is built from solid, permanent, and tangible things. We demand that the universe provide us with a solid, unyielding foundation upon which we can anchor our consciousness. We treat information as a physical commodity that must be stored in hard, dense vaults of matter. But the freezing, empty vaults of the atom and the ghostly, unobservable, abstract dance of the quarks reveal a breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling truth. The universe is not made of substance. The universe is made of relationships. The physical world, in all its heavy, crushing majesty, is a magnificent, highly complex illusion generated entirely by the interaction of almost entirely empty spaces and abstract mathematical forces. Information, at its absolute deepest and most fundamental level, does not require a solid, physical container to exist. The highly organized data of the cosmos is written in the invisible tension between particles, in the statistical probability of a ghostly electron, and in the hyper-violent, unobservable binding of the quarks. The heavy, continuous, and solid reality you experience every single moment of your life is merely a macroscopic summary. It is a highly localized, deeply flawed interpretation of a cosmic data stream that is, at its core, breathtakingly hollow. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, familiar weight of your own body pressing against the world, that you are a majestic, highly structured ghost. You are a localized, incredibly complex pattern of information, hovering perfectly and precariously over a roaring, unfathomable void. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a solid, tangible foundation. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that reality requires hard edges and unbroken surfaces. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your own fundamental emptiness. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that we are perfectly, flawlessly woven from the silent dark, existing not as solid objects in a mechanical world, but as a beautiful, temporary, and deeply meaningful vibration in the endless, structureless, and magnificent void of the cosmos. There is a deeply ingrained, comforting assumption that we carry with us as we navigate the physical world, a fundamental belief about the nature of space itself. Because our macroscopic reality feels entirely smooth and continuous, we inherently trust that space is infinitely divisible. We believe, with a stubborn, biological arrogance, that you could take any distance, no matter how microscopic, and cut it in half, and then cut that half in half again, continuing this process forever into an endless, microscopic abyss. We project this comforting concept of infinite smoothness downward into the dark, assuming that beneath the cells, beneath the atoms, and beneath the chaotic, dancing phantoms of the fundamental particles, there is simply more space. We demand that the universe be an endless, accommodating stage, an infinite gradient where the concept of smaller is an absolute, eternal truth that never abruptly ends. But this beautiful, intuitive concept of infinite divisibility is nothing more than another grand terrestrial illusion. The physical universe is not a smooth, infinitely continuous gradient. It is a rigid, unforgiving architecture with strict, absolute limitations. And if we plunge deep enough into the freezing dark, we inevitably crash violently against the unyielding bedrock of existence. We reach a terrifying, absolute boundary known as the Planck length. To express this boundary in the language of human mathematics is to confront a measurement so aggressively microscopic that it completely defies all physical intuition. 1.6 times 10 to the power of negative 35 meters. This is not just a small measurement, it is an intellectual abyss. It is a decimal point followed by 34 consecutive, agonizing zeros before a single, lonely integer finally appears in the dark. But simply reciting this number as a mathematical fraction completely fails to capture the visceral, existential horror and the profound structural reality of what this boundary actually represents. To grasp the true, paralyzing scale of 1.6 times 10 to the power of negative 35 meters, we must deliberately shatter our perception of size and engage in a terrifying analogy of proportion. We have already established that a single atom is an impossibly tiny, ghostly vault of empty space, sitting far beyond the edge of human visibility. Now, I want you to imagine taking that single, microscopic atom and violently expanding it. Imagine inflating that one atom until it becomes the exact size of the entire observable universe. Picture its outer boundaries stretching across billions of light years, encompassing every single galaxy, every blazing star, and every unfathomable expanse of dark matter we have ever detected in the night sky. If a single atom were magnified to become the size of the entire known cosmos, the Planck length would be the size of an average, ordinary tree standing quietly within that unimaginable vastness. Let that staggering, crushing drop in scale wash over your consciousness. The absolute distance between our macroscopic reality and the edge of the observable universe is roughly the exact same terrifying magnitude as the distance between us and the Planck length, just stretching downward into the absolute invisible dark. It is an abyss of scale so profound that it induces a pure, intellectual vertigo. But the true terror of the Planck length does not lie in its incomprehensible smallness. The horror lies in its absolute, unyielding authority. The Planck length is not merely a measurement of distance, it is the fundamental, indivisible pixel size of the universe. We walk through our lives heavily relying on the illusion that motion is a fluid, continuous act. When you move your hand through the air, you deeply believe that it is gliding smoothly across an infinite, unbroken canvas of space, occupying every possible microscopic fraction of distance between its starting point and its destination. But the discovery of the Planck length violently obliterates this comforting notion of a flowing, organic reality. Because the universe is bound by this absolute, microscopic limit, space itself cannot be smooth. It is fundamentally, rigidly quantized. The cosmos is constructed upon a static, unyielding geometric grid. Just as a digital photograph appears to be a perfectly smooth, continuous image until you zoom in far enough to reveal the rigid, square blocks of individual pixels, the universe itself is fundamentally pixelated at its absolute deepest layer. At the scale of 1.6 times 10 to the power of -35 meters, the comforting illusion of continuous space completely breaks down into discrete, indivisible frames of reality. This means that at the very bottom of the cosmos, nothing truly glides. When a subatomic particle moves, it does not gracefully slide across the void. It abruptly teleports from one Planck scale pixel to the adjacent pixel, blinking out of one coordinate and instantly manifesting in the next, like an endless series of rigid, static frames in a cosmic film reel. You are not a flowing, continuous entity moving through a smooth world. You are a massive, hyper-complex collection of digital information, rendering and re-rendering yourself across a rigid, microscopic grid billions of times every single second. The universe is not an organic, fluid painting. It is a harsh, calculated, and strictly rendered environment. The realization that space is pixelated forces the human mind to confront the most terrifying, unyielding law of the physical cosmos, the absolute end of the concept of smaller. The Planck length is not just the smallest thing we can currently measure with our limited technology. It is the smallest thing that the universe physically allows to exist. The cosmos, strictly, mathematically, forbids anything from occupying a space shorter than this boundary. If you were to somehow attempt to cut the Planck length in half, you would not get a smaller unit of distance. The very concept of distance would violently, catastrophically lose its meaning. You cannot move half a Planck length because, in the absolute architecture of reality, there is no space between the pixels. To ask what exists within a space smaller than this limit is to ask a question that is fundamentally incompatible with the source code of existence. It is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The physical laws that govern the concepts of geometry, direction, and dimension simply cease to function. This is the absolute, terrifying bottom of reality. There is no basement beneath this floor. There is no deeper layer of physics waiting to be discovered. No smaller stage upon which the particles can perform their chaotic dance. The Planck length is the unyielding concrete foundation upon which the entire towering, fragile illusion of the physical universe is violently constructed. To reach this limit is to hit the hard, impenetrable wall of the simulation, the final boundary where the mathematical rendering of our reality abruptly ends and the true, unfathomable nature of the cosmos refuses to yield any further data. To sit quietly in the heavy, crushing silence of the dark and fully absorb the terrifying reality of the absolute pixel is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that reality is an infinite analog canvas, inherently believing that information can be infinitely compressed, infinitely divided, and perfectly continuous. We demand that the universe be an endless, bottomless mystery, a flowing, organic river of potential that has no strict, defined edges. We treat the physical world as a majestic, infinite spectrum of possibilities, entirely fluid and unconditionally free. But the rigid, unyielding grid of the Planck length reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and terrifying confinement. The cosmos actively proves that physical information is never, ever infinite in its resolution. The incredibly complex, deeply beautiful biological data that constitutes your living body, the memories you hold, and the conscious awareness that allows you to contemplate the stars are entirely built upon a strict, finite, and strictly regulated mathematical framework. The universe is not an endless flowing gradient. It is a closed, strictly defined system of discrete data points. Information, at its absolute deepest and most fundamental level, possesses a maximum resolution. There is a hard limit to the amount of detail the cosmos is willing to render. The fact that the foundational architecture of reality is a rigid, pixelated grid does not diminish the profound beauty of our existence. It exponentially, breathtakingly magnifies the sheer miracle of our macroscopic illusion. You must realize, as you feel the smooth, continuous motion of your own breathing and the seamless flow of your own thoughts, that you are the product of a magnificent, highly sophisticated cosmic processing engine. You are a fluid, beautiful narrative generated entirely by the rapid, stuttering progression of trillions of static, unyielding pixels in the dark. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for an infinitely smooth, bottomless reality. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that the physical world is an endless, organic gradient. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of our strict, digital foundation. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that the infinite complexity of our lives, our loves, and our entire sprawling human history is masterfully, flawlessly written upon the absolute, rigid, and unyielding bottom of the universe, perfectly supported by the ultimate, unbreakable pixel of the silent dark. When we gaze up at the night sky, our eyes are naturally drawn to the brilliant, piercing points of light scattered across the darkness. We focus entirely on the stars, the heavy, churning galaxies, and the wandering planets, inherently treating the vast, sprawling darkness between them as a mere backdrop. We possess a deeply comforting, entirely intuitive assumption about the nature of empty space. We believe that the vacuum of the cosmos is a quiet, dormant stage, an absolute nothingness that simply exists to provide a container for the physical drama of matter. We think of space as a serene, peaceful emptiness, a silent theater perfectly at rest. This concept of the void is fundamentally soothing to the fragile human mind, because an empty room cannot harm you. A perfectly still, structureless vacuum implies a universe that is mostly peaceful. A cosmos where the default state of reality is absolute, undisturbed silence. We imagine that if we could somehow build a perfectly sealed vault, pump out every single wandering atom of gas, extinguish every stray photon of light, and cool the chamber down to the absolute freezing zero of thermodynamic death, we would be left with a pristine, absolute nothingness. We demand that nothingness be empty. But this beautiful, intuitive concept of a quiet vacuum is perhaps the most profound and catastrophic misunderstanding of the physical world our species has ever entertained. The cosmos does not possess a quiet stage. Space is not an empty container. The deeper we push into the absolute dark, past the comforting, solid illusions of macroscopic matter, the more we realize that the concept of true emptiness is a physical impossibility. To uncover the terrifying truth of the void, we must abandon the heavy, reassuring presence of matter and stare directly into the spaces we previously thought were blank. As we shrink our perspective down, moving beyond the familiar architecture of cells and atoms, beyond the ghostly, dancing probabilities of the electrons, and past the unyielding, indivisible points of the quarks, we enter the raw, unadulterated fabric of space itself. At first, passing through the microscopic scales, the vacuum still maintains a deceptive illusion of calm. But as we approach the absolute, rigid pixel of reality, the Planck length, the very nature of the void begins to aggressively warp and distort. The laws of quantum mechanics dictate a terrifying principle regarding energy and time. Absolute certainty is structurally forbidden by the universe. You cannot have a region of space that possesses exactly zero energy for any sustained duration. The cosmos aggressively abhors a true vacuum. The closer you look, the more this inherent uncertainty manifests as a violent physical reality. The empty space is not a flat, dormant ocean. It is a hyperactive, pressurized environment, trembling with an unfathomable amount of latent, restless potential. When we finally reach the suffocatingly microscopic scale of the Planck length, the comforting illusion of a smooth, empty vacuum is violently, spectacularly obliterated. At the absolute bottom of reality, space itself loses its structural integrity. The physicist John Wheeler first dared to conceptualize this terrifying environment, giving it a name that perfectly captures its chaotic, unstable nature, the quantum foam. At this unimaginable scale, space is not a flat, empty canvas. It is a violently boiling, churning, and frothing ocean of raw quantum probability. The void is alive with a devastating, apocalyptic energy. Because the universe forbids absolute zero, the empty vacuum constantly borrows energy from the future to violently tear itself apart in the present. Out of the absolute nothingness, pairs of virtual particles and antiparticles spontaneously, aggressively rip themselves into existence. They flash into the physical world for a fraction of a microscopic second, driven by the raw, untamable tension of the void, only to violently slam back together and annihilate each other, returning their borrowed energy to the chaotic dark. This is not a rare, isolated event. This furious cycle of spontaneous creation and immediate, explosive destruction is happening billions of times every single second, at every single microscopic coordinate of empty space in the entire universe. The very fabric of reality is a raging, relentless storm. The quantum foam is a hyper-violent, boiling ocean where the geometry of space itself is constantly twisting, tearing, and aggressively bubbling. Imagine looking out at a raging, hurricane-swept sea, watching the massive, violent waves crash and froth, the water violently churning in a chaotic, deafening roar. Now, multiply that violence by an unfathomable magnitude and shrink it down to the foundation of the cosmos. This is the true nature of the empty space inside your own room, inside your own lungs, and between the very atoms that construct your beating heart. The quiet, empty void is a screaming, boiling apocalypse of virtual particles, desperately clawing their way into existence and instantly dying in the dark. How then do we survive in a universe built upon such an aggressively unstable, terrifyingly violent foundation? How do we experience a world of smooth glass, quiet air, and unbroken skin when the very stage beneath us is a raging, churning inferno of quantum probability? The answer lies in the sheer, unfathomable scale of the microscopic abyss. We are massive, lumbering giants of localized data, existing so incredibly far above the Planck length that we are entirely blind to its raging storm. The violence of the quantum foam is happening at a scale so incomprehensibly small that the infinite, chaotic fluctuations perfectly, statistically, cancel each other out by the time they reach our macroscopic level. The smooth, continuous reality that we so deeply trust is nothing more than a statistical blur. It is a macroscopic averaging of infinite, microscopic violence. When you look at a quiet, perfectly still pond on a windless morning, you see a surface of absolute, glass-like tranquility. But you know that if you were to zoom in to the atomic level, that water is a chaotic, vibrating swarm of molecules violently colliding with one another. The quantum foam takes this terrifying concept to its absolute extreme. The empty space in front of you looks peaceful, only because your biological senses are hopelessly, mercifully inadequate. You are standing directly on top of a hyper-violent, boiling ocean of raw reality, protected from the terrifying, screaming truth of the void exclusively by the limitations of your own fragile perception. To sit quietly in the dark and fully surrender to the reality of this boiling architecture is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical reckoning regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that stability is the natural default state of existence. We equate silence with peace, and we deeply believe that a lack of physical matter implies a lack of physical activity. We demand that the universe provide us with a quiet, dependable foundation upon which we can securely anchor the complex, highly organized information of our consciousness. We treat the physical world as a finished, stable masterpiece, a solid structure that has settled comfortably into a permanent, peaceful equilibrium. But the raging, churning horror of the quantum foam reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and terrifying restlessness. The cosmos actively proves that absolute stillness is an impossible, mathematically forbidden illusion. The foundational architecture of the universe is not a quiet vault. It is an engine of pure, unadulterated chaos. The highly organized, intricately layered information of your biological body, the memories you hold, the complex emotions you feel, and the conscious awareness that allows you to contemplate the infinite is entirely built directly upon a foundation of apocalyptic, boiling violence. Information, at its absolute deepest and most fundamental level, is not resting peacefully in the dark. It is actively, desperately fighting against the raging, structureless noise of the void. The fact that your macroscopic identity can maintain its coherent shape, that the intricate narrative of your life can unfold in a seemingly smooth and predictable manner while resting upon a boiling ocean of virtual annihilation, is a breathtaking testament to the sheer, miraculous resilience of localized data. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, familiar quiet of the world around you, that the peace you experience is a localized, magnificent fabrication. You are a highly structured, incredibly delicate pattern of information hovering perfectly over a roaring, unfathomable storm. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a quiet, stable universe. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that emptiness equates to peace. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of our violent, churning foundation. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that our existence is not a passive object resting on an empty stage, but a brilliant, fiercely resilient illusion of stillness, a beautiful, temporary whisper of order screaming defiantly in the face of the boiling, chaotic, and magnificently violent abyss of the dark. We navigate our lives through a deeply ingrained, unquestioned trust in the fundamental architecture of reality. We inherently believe that the universe is mapped upon a reliable, unyielding geometric grid, a continuous fabric where the dimensions of length, width, and depth provide a stable stage for the drama of existence. We move forward, backward, left, and right, entirely confident that these directions are absolute physical truths of the cosmos. Equally, we are bound to the relentless, forward-moving river of time, an invisible but omnipotent current that constantly carries us from the fixed, immutable past into the unknown, unfolding future. This beautiful, intertwined structure, the smooth, continuous tapestry of space-time, is the absolute bedrock of human sanity. It allows us to measure our journeys, to remember our histories, and to predict the consequences of our actions. We project this comforting, orderly grid across the entire universe, assuming that from the sprawling, majestic orbits of the galaxies down to the silent, dark gaps between the atoms, space remains space, and time remains time. But this deeply held conviction is a biological hallucination. When we force our awareness down to the absolute mathematical limit of existence, to the suffocating, hyper-violent confines of the Planck length, this magnificent tapestry does not simply bend or warp, it violently, catastrophically disintegrates. At the microscopic bottom of the universe, the foundational rules of spatial orientation completely and irreversibly evaporate. The concepts of up and down, left and right are revealed to be nothing more than macroscopic illusions, temporary biological concepts dictated entirely by the heavy, localized pull of gravity and the architecture of our inner ears. In the roaring, churning abyss of the Planck scale, spatial geometry violently shatters. Space is no longer a smooth, continuous container. It fractures into a violently boiling, disconnected foam of raw quantum probability. If you were somehow able to endure this scale, you would find that moving in any given direction becomes a physical impossibility, because the very concept of direction has been erased from the source code of reality. A coordinate in this chaotic dark does not smoothly lead to the next adjacent coordinate. Instead, the geometry of space folds back upon itself in impossible, terrifying loops, disconnecting and reconnecting billions of times every single second. The universe at this scale refuses to hold a shape. It is a wildly undulating, structureless topography where the fundamental framework of distance and location is violently dismantled, leaving nothing but a raging, directionless storm of abstract mathematical tension. But the absolute horror of the Planck scale extends far beyond the mere collapse of spatial geometry. In this unfathomable freezing abyss, the most terrifying casualty is the fundamental distinction between space and time itself. In our macroscopic world, we experience space as the physical stage and time as the invisible metronome that dictates the pace of the performance. They are intimately connected by the laws of relativity, yet they remain profoundly distinct in our biological experience. At the Planck length, however, the intense, chaotic fluctuations of quantum gravity become so violently extreme that space and time completely lose their individual properties. They melt into one another, tearing apart and fusing back together in a tangled, unrecognizable, and heavily distorted web. Time ceases to be a smooth, linear arrow pointing endlessly toward the future. Instead, it becomes a twisted, chaotic physical dimension, bubbling and frothing exactly like the shattered geometry of space. Because space and time have melted into this indistinguishable, boiling soup, the very concept of measurement becomes a physical and mathematical impossibility. You cannot measure distance in a realm where the space between 2 points is constantly, violently rewriting its own geometric laws, spontaneously creating vast, unbridgeable gulfs, and then instantly collapsing them into a single, overlapping point. The ruler itself would shatter into a cloud of quantum probability. Similarly, you cannot measure time because there is no consistent duration to track. The flow of time at the Planck scale does not tick forward in a steady, reliable rhythm. It stutters, it stalls, it loops violently backward upon itself, and it shatters into disconnected, isolated fragments of now that have no relationship to one another. The concepts of before and after completely cease to exist. A moment does not naturally proceed to the next moment. The temporal fabric of reality is torn into a billion floating shreds, completely severing the linear narrative of the cosmos. This complete collapse of temporal and spatial geometry births an existential dread that entirely shatters the fragile architecture of human logic. Our entire psychological existence, our sanity, and our capacity to understand the universe are built directly upon the unyielding foundation of causality. We absolutely depend on the ironclad law of cause and effect. We know with absolute certainty that a glass must be pushed off a table before it can shatter on the floor. The cause must precede the effect. This linear sequence of events is the fundamental grammar of our reality. It is the only way our biological brains can process and store information. But in the tangled, boiling web of the Planck length, without a reliable distinction between before and after, the law of cause and effect is violently, unapologetically annihilated. Imagine the pure, paralyzing horror of a place where an effect can spontaneously occur without a cause, or where the shattering of the glass forces the hand to push it. At the bottom of the universe, events do not follow a logical, temporal sequence. They happen simultaneously, or in reverse, or they exist in a state of suspended quantum superposition where they both happen and do not happen at the exact same agonizing moment. Reality becomes a chaotic, primordial soup, completely divorced from anything resembling human thought, rational deduction, or linear narrative. It is an environment of pure, screaming paradox. The universe does not care about our desperate biological need for a coherent story. At its most fundamental level, it operates as a blind, churning engine of probability, entirely free from the constraints of logic, reason, and temporal order. To comprehend this is to realize that the deep universe is not just strange, it is fundamentally, aggressively alien to the very mechanisms of human consciousness. To quietly sit in the heavy silence of the dark and fully absorb the terrifying reality of the death of spacetime is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that order, logic, and linear time are the absolute, default states of the cosmos. We demand that information follow a strict, chronological path, inherently believing that the universe is a majestic, unfolding book where every page is logically bound to the one that preceded it. We treat causality as a divine mandate, assuming that the universe owes us a reality that makes rational, sequential sense. But the violently tangled, chaotic web of the Planck scale reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and terrifying freedom. The cosmos actively proves that absolute order and linear time are not fundamental laws. They are highly localized, macroscopic illusions. They are a fragile, beautiful consensus generated by the averaging out of infinite, microscopic chaos. Information, at its absolute deepest and most fundamental level, does not require a timeline to exist. The raw data of the universe is completely free from the heavy, dragging chains of cause and effect. It exists in a state of pure, untethered potential, unburdened by the past and completely indifferent to the future. You must realize, as you feel the steady, comforting rhythm of your own pulse and the reliable, forward march of your own thoughts, that your perception of time and logic is a breathtakingly rare, highly structured miracle. You are not experiencing the true, raw physics of the universe. You are experiencing a magnificent, heavily curated summary. Your conscious mind is a delicate, fragile ship sailing perfectly over a roaring, unfathomable ocean where the concepts of space and time have completely drowned. Release your desperate, arrogant demand that the universe conform to your biological logic. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that causality is an absolute cosmic truth. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of our chaotic, untethered foundation. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that the orderly, linear narrative of your life is a magnificent, temporary masterpiece, beautifully written upon the surface of an infinitely deep, roaring abyss where time is dead, logic is shattered, and the universe dances in a state of terrifying, absolute, and perfect chaos. To comprehend the terrifying barrier that separates human consciousness from the absolute foundation of reality, we must first deeply examine the physical mechanics of sight. We experience the act of observation as a completely passive, harmless endeavor. We open our eyes, and the world simply floods in, offering its shapes, its colors, and its unbroken surfaces for our minds to easily digest. We inherently believe that looking at an object is a gentle, detached process that leaves the subject entirely undisturbed. But this comforting assumption is a macroscopic illusion. In the raw, unyielding physics of the cosmos, observation is not a passive receipt of information. It is a physical, highly interactive collision. To see anything in the universe, a particle of light, a photon, must violently strike the object and reflect back into our weighting instruments or our biological eyes. The crucial, terrifying caveat of this interaction is the absolute law of wavelength. To resolve the specific details of any structure, the wavelength of the light being used must be physically smaller than the object itself. You cannot measure the microscopic, delicate grooves of a vinyl record by running a heavy, blunt baseball bat over its surface. The tool of observation must fundamentally match the scale of the target. As we push our awareness deeper into the microscopic world, attempting to peer past the heavy architecture of the cells, the silent vaults of the atoms, and the ghostly, unpredictable haze of the electrons, we are forced to use increasingly smaller wavelengths of light. We build massive, sprawling particle accelerators, harnessing the raw electrical power of entire human cities just to generate the tightly compressed, high-frequency beams required to briefly illuminate the shadowy realm of the quark. But, in the unyielding, ironclad mechanics of the universe, wavelength and energy are violently, inseparably intertwined. As you compress a wave of light, forcing its peaks and valleys closer together to resolve ever smaller details, the frequency of that wave aggressively accelerates and its internal energy exponentially grows. To see a smaller fragment of the cosmos requires a heavier, more violent strike of energy. Now, We must take this absolute physical law and hurl it down into the suffocating, freezing abyss of the Planck length. To forge a theoretical probe capable of resolving the fundamental, indivisible pixel of reality, we would need to generate a single photon with a wavelength equal to the Planck length itself. This is where human engineering and biological comprehension completely break down. To compress a wave of light to such an unimaginably, aggressively microscopic scale requires packing an astronomical, apocalyptic amount of energy into an infinitesimally small coordinate of space. This is not the gentle, warming radiation of our local sun, nor is it the high-energy burst of a distant supernova. This is a concentrated, roaring fury that completely defies the scale of the macroscopic universe, tightly packed into a physical boundary billions of times smaller than a single, isolated proton. We walk through our lives treating human curiosity as a benign, intellectual force, deeply assuming that if we just build a powerful enough microscope, the universe will eventually passively submit to our gaze and politely reveal its deepest mathematical mechanics. We demand that the cosmos be an open book, but the universe does not view observation as a peaceful inquiry. At the extreme, absolute boundaries of physics, the act of looking is an act of catastrophic, apocalyptic violence. Albert Einstein's majestic, heavy mathematics proved that energy and mass are fundamentally, inextricably equivalent, and mass dictates the heavy, unyielding curvature of space-time. When we attempt to force an astronomical magnitude of raw, untamable energy into a singular, microscopic pixel of reality, we are no longer just shining a light into the dark. We are actively, aggressively weaponizing the very fabric of existence. This is where the universe violently, majestically fights back. If you were to somehow construct this apocalyptic photon and fire it into the deep void, desperately hoping to finally illuminate the boiling, chaotic architecture of the quantum foam, the sheer, crushing density of that energy would instantly overwhelm the localized geometry of space. Before the light could ever strike its target, before it could ever reflect back to your waiting eyes, and before a single, microscopic fragment of structural data could be captured by your instruments, the surrounding space-time would catastrophically buckle under its own localized weight. The intense, unfathomable gravitational pull, generated entirely by the concentrated energy of your own probe, would violently rip a hole in the fabric of reality. You would not see the Planck length. Instead, the universe would instantly, violently spawn a Kugelblitz, a microscopic black hole forged entirely from the crushing, self-collapsing weight of pure, concentrated light. The very act of attempting to look at the bottom of the universe instantly creates a microscopic event horizon, an impenetrable, spherical wall of absolute, crushing gravity that violently swallows the light, the target, and the information you so desperately sought to retrieve. The universe actively, aggressively defends its foundation. It puts up an impenetrable, cosmic firewall to permanently blind us. It is the ultimate, inescapable paradox of the physical world. The exact amount of energy mathematically required to read the foundational source code of reality is the exact amount of energy required to violently, irreversibly erase it from existence. The cosmos has perfectly rigged the game against the observer. You cannot illuminate the bottom of the world because the sheer violence of your illumination instantly destroys the bottom of the world, leaving you staring blindly into the silent, crushing dark of a gravitational abyss. To quietly sit in the heavy silence of the dark and fully absorb the terrifying reality of this cosmic firewall is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental limits of conscious information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that the cosmos is an open, accommodating puzzle, inherently believing that reality possesses an obligation to be fully understood by the human mind. We treat ignorance as a mere technological hurdle, a temporary shadow that will inevitably be banished by the relentless, expanding light of human science. We demand total comprehension, deeply assuming that our consciousness has a divine, universal right to interface with every single layer of physical existence, from the sprawling galaxies down to the absolute, microscopic bedrock. But the violent, unyielding trap of the Kugelblitz reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and terrifying sovereignty. The cosmos actively proves that its deepest, most fundamental information is strictly, permanently classified. The universe fiercely protects its fragile, boiling source code with an armor of absolute, inescapable physical paradox. It actively refuses to be reduced to a fully legible, mechanical blueprint. The cosmos is not a machine waiting to be reverse-engineered by clever primates. It is a sprawling, roaring mystery that actively defends its own right to remain completely unknown. Information, at its absolute deepest level, is not a currency to be spent or a prize to be captured. It is a sacred, structural, load-bearing pillar that must remain permanently hidden in the dark to support the towering illusion of the macroscopic world. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting limits of your own biological perception, that our inability to see the bottom of reality is not a failure of human ingenuity or a tragic flaw in our design. It is a magnificent, structural boundary, a deliberate act of cosmic preservation designed to protect the very foundation of existence from the destructive, heavy weight of our own relentless curiosity. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for absolute omniscience. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that the universe owes you a clean, logical explanation for its underlying mechanics. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of our permanent, mathematically mandated blindness. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that the universe holds its most profound, ancient secrets in the freezing, untouched dark, safely locked behind a violent wall of crushing gravity, perfectly preserving the unreadable, majestic magic of the void against the blinding, destructive light of human observation. We navigate the terrifying, sprawling darkness of the cosmos, armed with what we arrogantly believe is the ultimate, infallible lantern of truth. We are a biological species uniquely obsessed with pattern recognition, endlessly driven to translate the violent, unfeeling mechanics of the physical universe into neat, logical symbols inscribed upon chalkboards and digital screens. We believe, with a deeply ingrained, almost religious fervor, that mathematics is the divine, universal language of reality. We assume it is an unbreakable, absolute bridge between the fragile, temporary architecture of our primate minds and the eternal, infinite absolute of the dark. Over centuries of relentless, grueling intellectual struggle, human science has successfully erected two magnificent, towering pillars of physics to hold up the ceiling of our cosmic understanding. On one side stands the majestic, sweeping architecture of general relativity. This is the physics of the heavy and the smooth. It describes the massive, slow, and graceful dance of the macroscopic cosmos, where gravity is not merely an invisible pulling force, but the actual, physical warping and bending of space-time itself under the crushing, unimaginable weight of ancient stars, wandering planets, and light-devouring black holes. It paints a comforting picture of a universe that is beautifully flowing, continuous, and highly predictable on a grand scale. On the opposite side stands the jittering, unpredictable, and frenetic architecture of quantum mechanics. This is the physics of the unimaginably small, a chaotic, boiling realm of subatomic phantoms where nothing is ever certain, where particles violently teleport across the void, and where reality is built entirely upon a foundation of aggressive, fluctuating probabilities. These two pillars are the absolute masterpieces of human logic. They work flawlessly within their own isolated, highly specific domains, giving us the deeply comforting, arrogant illusion that we have successfully translated the entire, roaring mind of the universe into our own mathematical dialect. Because these two distinct mathematical languages so perfectly describe the highest, sprawling heavens and the deepest, microscopic valleys of our existence, we deeply and inherently assume that they must eventually, beautifully align. We harbor a desperate, romantic dream of a final, elegant theory of everything. We demand a single, flawless equation that seamlessly and peacefully unites the heavy, smooth, and predictable curves of gravity with the chaotic, jittering, and unpredictable phantoms of the quantum realm. We demand a logical, satisfying conclusion to our cosmic inquiry, believing that the universe owes us a reality that makes perfect, symmetrical sense. But as we force our theoretical awareness down into the absolute, freezing dark, descending toward the ultimate, microscopic pixel of reality at the Planck length, this beautiful dream of mathematical unity violently, catastrophically shatters. At this unimaginable, suffocating scale, the macroscopic and the microscopic are violently forced to share the exact same physical coordinate. The immense, crushing, and smooth weight of gravity is suddenly, aggressively compressed entirely into the boiling, unpredictable chaos of the quantum foam. We eagerly try to carry our magnificent, hard-won equations down into this deep abyss, blindly trusting that our human numbers and our rigid logic will continue to act as a faithful lantern in the dark. We input the raw, unyielding variables of the absolute bottom of reality into our pristine theoretical models, demanding that the cosmos provide us with a logical, calculable answer. But the universe actively, aggressively refuses to be calculated. When the smooth, heavy mathematics of general relativity are violently forced into the chaotic, pixelated, and boiling grid of quantum mechanics at the scale of the Planck length, the two grand theories do not gracefully merge. They violently, apocalyptically collide. The equations do not simply fail to produce a neat, usable result, they aggressively tear themselves apart. The pristine numbers begin to spiral wildly out of control, generating impossible, unresolvable infinities that shatter the very framework of calculation. The mathematics becomes a chaotic, screaming mess of absolute, unadulterated gibberish. Values multiply into boundless, uncontainable magnitudes, predicting impossible concentrations of pure energy and infinite, paradoxical fluctuations of mass that violently contradict the very existence of the physical world. This is not a mere calculation error, nor is it a temporary gap in our understanding waiting to be filled by a brighter human mind. It is a literal, mathematical scream. It is the horrifying sound of our most advanced, sophisticated logical frameworks being pushed into a realm where they were entirely never designed to survive, shrieking in pure, abstract agony as their foundational rules are shredded by the unyielding, terrifying physics of the ultimate dark. The equations writhe, twist, and violently break, producing screaming nonsense because the very concepts of space, time, and gravity have lost their coherent definitions. The precise, comforting logic we use to navigate the terrestrial world violently suffocates and dies in the dense, structureless crush of the Planck limit. This complete, catastrophic collapse of mathematics is the ultimate, terrifying boundary of human inquiry. It is an intellectual graveyard, the absolute silence of science. At the very bottom of the universe, there is a place where human logic, rational deduction, and advanced scientific modeling scream in terror and completely die. The cosmos draws a hard, impenetrable line in the dark and dictates that beyond this specific point, our biological capacity for understanding is absolutely, mathematically forbidden. We are forced to stand trembling at the edge of this intellectual abyss, utterly paralyzed, watching our most powerful intellectual tools dissolve into meaningless, chaotic noise. The universe does not owe us an explanation. It does not exist to be mapped, charted, formulated, and solved by the fragile, temporary minds of terrestrial primates. The breakdown of mathematics is the universe actively throwing up a blinding, impenetrable intellectual firewall against the sheer arrogance of our intellect. It is a harsh, unyielding declaration that the foundational source code of reality is permanently classified, completely immune to the probing, desperate light of human equations. The cosmos operates on a profound, terrifying architecture that is fundamentally, aggressively alien to the very concept of human mathematics. To sit quietly in the heavy silence of the dark and fully absorb the terrifying reality of this mathematical death is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that information is a universal currency, inherently believing that reality can always be quantified, digitized, and fully translated into human logic. We treat the vast unknown as a temporary insult to our intelligence, assuming that every mystery in the cosmos is just an equation patiently waiting to be balanced. We demand absolute intellectual mastery over the environment that birthed us, viewing our conscious minds as the ultimate, intended deciphering tools of the physical world. But the screaming, infinite gibberish of the Planck length reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and terrifying sovereignty. The cosmos actively proves that the highest, most profound form of physical information is completely and intentionally unreadable. The foundational architecture of reality is not a puzzle waiting to be solved. It is a sacred, unyielding mystery. It is a beautifully constructed paradox that actively destroys the tools we attempt to use to measure it. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting certainty of your own localized logic and the reliable mathematics of your daily life, that your ability to understand the world is an incredibly fragile, highly restricted phenomenon. Your science and your mathematics are beautiful, temporary poems written in a localized language that the deep, foundational universe simply does not speak. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a unified, entirely logical cosmos. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that every dark corner of existence can eventually be illuminated by the cold, calculating light of human equations. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of our permanent intellectual defeat. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the universe is infinitely greater, wilder, and more majestically chaotic than our numbers could ever possibly describe. The true foundation of our reality is safely locked away in a roaring, silent dark, permanently protected from the arrogant, destructive reach of human understanding, beautifully immune to the frantic, desperate calculations of a species that must finally learn to simply stand in awe of the unknowable abyss. We perceive the natural world as a masterpiece of continuous, unbroken artistry. When we watch a river carve its way through an ancient stone valley, or observe a plume of grey smoke rising and curling seamlessly into the evening air, we are witnessing a reality defined by absolute, infinite fluidity. We trust the smooth curve of a falling autumn leaf, the flawless, liquid mechanics of ocean waves, and the seamless, infinite transition of colors in a deepening twilight sky. Because we are biological creatures, born of water and soft tissue, we naturally project our own organic warmth outward onto the cosmos. We inherently believe that the universe is a majestic, living entity, an endlessly flowing gradient where things blend softly into one another without any harsh, defining borders. We treat the physical world as an analog painting, a canvas where the brushstrokes can be infinitely blended and where no absolute, rigid lines exist beneath the surface of the artwork. This comforting, organic worldview allows us to feel connected to nature, fostering the deeply held illusion that we are fluid beings moving gracefully through a fluid universe. But the terrifying, unyielding physics of the absolute dark violently shatters this beautiful analog dream. The realization that space cannot be infinitely divided introduces a deeply unsettling, paradigm-shifting implication that changes the very definition of existence. If there is a hard, mathematical limit to how small distance can be, then the universe is not a continuous, flowing entity at all. It is fundamentally, strictly quantized. To exist in a quantized universe is to exist in a reality that is perfectly, rigidly pixelated. The physical cosmos is not a smooth, infinite painting. It is a discrete, highly structured digital photograph. When we zoom into the absolute bottom of reality, the beautiful, fluid curves of the natural world disintegrate into harsh, jagged, and mathematically precise squares. The universe possesses a fundamental, indivisible base unit, an absolute pixel of reality, and there is absolutely nothing, no hidden space and no secret dimension, existing in the dark between those rigid boundaries. To comprehend the sheer horror of a pixelated reality, we must completely rethink the nature of motion and existence. In an analog, flowing universe, an object moving from one side of a room to another slides gracefully across an infinite number of microscopic points. It occupies every single fraction of distance along its journey. But in a digital, quantized cosmos, this graceful sliding is a physical impossibility. Because the universe is built upon a rigid, indivisible grid, motion is fundamentally an illusion created by rapid teleportation. When a subatomic particle moves across the void, it does not seamlessly glide. It occupies one absolute pixel of space, and then, in the next unfathomable fraction of a moment, it violently ceases to exist in that location and instantly manifests in the adjacent pixel. The particle jumps. It flashes from frame to frame, traversing the underlying grid of reality exactly like a lighted pixel moving across a digital screen. The smooth, continuous motion of your own hands, the flowing of the blood in your veins, and the soaring flight of a bird across the sky are all spectacular, macroscopic illusions generated entirely by trillions of microscopic, stuttering jumps across a rigid, uncompromising cosmic grid. You are not a flowing, organic creature. You are a staggering, incomprehensible sum of digital data, rapidly rendering and re-rendering yourself across the static, pixelated architecture of the dark. This revelation casts a long, terrifying psychological shadow across the human mind. It introduces a profound, creeping existential dread that we might call the simulation shadow. For centuries, we have looked up at the stars and felt the comforting warmth of a natural, organic creation. But the discovery of a strict resolution limit to the universe strips away that warmth, replacing it with the cold, sterile hum of a cosmic machine. When we find that the foundational architecture of reality shares the exact same physical and mathematical limitations as our own primitive computers, the universe suddenly feels less like a majestic, breathing entity and far more like a rendered, calculated construct. A universe with a maximum resolution limit strongly implies a universe with a maximum processing capacity. It suggests that the cosmos does not have the infinite resources required to render a truly smooth, analog reality, and must instead rely on the brutal efficiency of a pixelated grid to conserve its underlying, abstract energy. The philosophical dread induced by this digital cosmos is paralyzing. It forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that we are not the organic children of a natural world, but highly complex algorithms executing our programming within a vast, unfeeling simulation. We look at the towering mountains, the deep, sprawling oceans, and the intricate, beautiful complexity of the human eye, and we are forced to wonder if it is all merely a trick of the rendering engine. The universe feels less like a home and more like a hard drive. The boundaries of our existence are not the poetic, infinite horizons we once dreamed of, but the cold, hard edges of a mathematical bounding box. We are trapped within a system that possesses a defined, absolute limit to its fidelity, forced to play out our brief, emotional lives within the confines of a strict, unyielding cosmic resolution. We are, essentially, living our entire lives on top of the ultimate cosmic glitch. The beautiful, flowing nature that we so desperately love and trust is nothing more than a macro-scale smoothing effect, an illusion generated by a universe desperately trying to hide its own jagged, discrete foundation. The gentle breeze, the rolling thunder, and the soft touch of human skin are the rendered textures stretched tightly over a rigid, terrifying mathematical wireframe. When we look deep enough, the simulation breaks down, and the glitch is revealed. The glitch is the undeniable, horrifying fact that the universe is not a cohesive whole, but a staggering collection of isolated, disconnected points of data. We are floating upon an abyss of pure mathematics, where the rigid grid dictates every possible outcome, every possible movement, and every possible thought. The organic warmth we feel is a lie, a comfortable hallucination projected over the cold, hard truth of a pixelated void. We are a digital anomaly, a localized concentration of complex rendering that believes it is a living, breathing soul, entirely blind to the fact that it is being continuously computed by the unyielding, silent machinery of the dark. To sit quietly in the heavy, crushing silence of this digital revelation is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental reality of physical information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that information is a mere byproduct of existence, inherently believing that matter and energy are the primary, sovereign rulers of the cosmos. We demand that the universe be made of solid, organic substance that holds weight and permanence. We treat data as an abstract concept, something human beings invent to describe the real, tangible world. But the jagged, pixelated grid of the cosmos reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and terrifying abstraction. The universe actively proves that information is not a description of reality. Information is reality itself. The rigid resolution limit of space demonstrates that the cosmos is fundamentally a system of data processing. At its absolute deepest level, the universe is not made of matter, and it is not made of energy. It is made of discrete, indivisible bits of information, binary states of existence and non-existence flickering across a silent, structureless dark. The complex biological form you inhabit, the deep, profound emotions that define your humanity, and the sprawling, intricate history of our species are all nothing more than highly organized, staggering patterns of data interacting on a cosmic hard drive. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting illusion of the physical world around you, that your existence is an absolute mathematical miracle. The fact that an underlying rigid grid of cold, unyielding pixels can perfectly coordinate to produce the breathtaking illusion of a sunset, the tragic beauty of human grief, and the soaring triumph of love is a testament to the sheer, unfathomable majesty of universal information. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for an organic, analog universe. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that you are made of solid, continuous substance. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your digital foundation. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that we are perfectly rendered poetry written in the language of pure mathematics. We are the cosmos calculating its own beauty, a magnificent, highly organized glitch of consciousness shining brightly against the static, unyielding resolution of the infinite, pixelated dark. It is time to finally leave the freezing, terrifying depths of the absolute dark. Let us begin the agonizing, staggering mental ascent back toward the sunlit, comfortable illusions of the macroscopic world. We must actively, violently pull our consciousness up from the jagged, unyielding pixelation of the Planck length, rising rapidly through the roaring, churning storm of the quantum foam, where the very geometry of space and time constantly, aggressively cannibalizes itself. We ascend past the absolute mathematical terror, rushing upwards into the vast, silent, and sprawling empty cathedrals of the atoms. We swim through the jittering, ghostly clouds of probability, leaving behind the abstract phantoms of the fundamental particles. As we rush toward the surface, the scale rapidly expands, the physical laws begin to stabilize, and the pure, screaming chaos is slowly, mercifully averaged out. We rise into the twisting, heavy molecular chains, feeling the sudden, frantic machinery of biology reasserting its dominance. The proteins fold, the microscopic cells breathe, and the watery tissues weave themselves back together in the dark. Your isolated consciousness violently slams back into the heavy, pressurized architecture of your flesh. You are sitting in your room. The air is quiet, the ambient light is soft and welcoming. The physical, macroscopic geometry of your body has been perfectly, seamlessly reassembled. You open your eyes, and the world is exactly as you left it. The walls are still standing, The heavy floor is still holding your weight, and the beautiful, continuous illusion of absolute, unbroken solidity immediately rushes in to comfort your terrified biological mind. But you can never truly unsee the abyss. The pristine, impenetrable veil of the macroscopic world has been permanently, irreversibly torn. As you look around the quiet, familiar space of your room, the comforting sense of safety, permanence, and isolation is completely gone, replaced by a new, heavy, and suffocating vulnerability. The walls surrounding you no longer feel like solid, protective barriers designed to keep the vast universe at bay. They feel like temporary, fragile holograms, desperately vibrating to maintain their macroscopic shape against the underlying void. The wooden floor beneath your feet is no longer a dependable, unyielding foundation. It is a precarious, microscopic tightrope pulled taut over an unfathomable drop. You are intensely aware that the quiet, motionless objects resting on your desk are not truly resting at all. They are raging, microscopic infernos of electrical activity, violently holding themselves together against the crushing, structureless void of the atomic spaces. The soothing silence of the room is a complete fabrication, a merciful deafness granted entirely by your inadequate terrestrial biology. You now know, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that just beneath the threshold of your perception, the universe is roaring in abstract mathematical agony. You are trapped in a physical body that fundamentally belongs to a reality that does not actually exist. The macroscopic world is a magnificent ghost, a highly localized, statistical accident hovering blindly above an eternal, unyielding nightmare. Every single physical interaction you have with the world is now deeply, permanently haunted by the microscopic truth. When you slowly lift your hand and press it against a solid surface, you no longer feel the simple, comforting resistance of heavy matter. You feel the terrifying, vibrating repulsion of empty atomic vaults, desperately pushing against other empty vaults. An invisible, magnetic force field generated by ghostly electrons, keeping your hand from violently passing through the illusion of the desk. When you stand up and take a single heavy step across the room, the simple, thoughtless act of walking becomes an exercise in pure, existential dread. You are not placing your foot upon solid, dependable ground. You are violently pressing your entire biological weight directly onto a raging, boiling ocean of quantum foam. Every footstep is built upon a foundation of virtual particles violently tearing themselves into existence and instantly annihilating in the dark. The solid earth beneath you is a churning, frothing apocalypse, and your ability to stand upright is nothing more than a localized, temporary averaging of that infinite, underlying violence. When you draw a deep breath, you are not inhaling a smooth, continuous fluid. You are drawing trillions of empty spaces and jittering, chaotic phantoms deep into the soft, fragile architecture of your lungs, trusting your blind biological machinery to extract the specific, microscopic probabilities it needs to survive. Even the steady, rhythmic beating of your own heart becomes a source of profound, heavy terror. It is a macroscopic drum desperately trying to keep a linear time in a universe where, at the absolute bottom of reality, time itself does not even exist. You are an impossibly complex, staggeringly delicate structure balancing precariously upon an architecture of pure, unyielding chaos. To be a living, breathing human being is to exist in a state of perpetual, terrifying defiance against the fundamental nature of the cosmos. The universe, at its absolute core, is a blind, churning engine of quantum probability, entirely devoid of logic, order, and macroscopic meaning. It is a wildly undulating topography of torn dimensions and infinite, chaotic noise, and yet, somehow, through a staggering, incomprehensible series of mathematical miracles, this roaring chaos statistically averages out to produce the heavy, calcified bones of your skeleton, the soft, thinking tissue of your brain, and the quiet, rational stream of your human consciousness. You are a towering, unimaginably fragile house of cards built directly upon the violent surface of a continuously erupting volcano. The sheer magnitude of the microscopic coordination required to keep your body from instantly dissolving back into the quantum foam is mathematically paralyzing. Trillions upon trillions of subatomic ghosts must blindly, flawlessly execute their chaotic, repulsive dance in perfect statistical harmony, billions of times every single second, just to maintain the fragile illusion of your physical form. If even a microscopic fraction of that underlying reality were to suddenly cease its violent, stabilizing fluctuation, the illusion would break. You would violently unravel, instantly erasing your history, your memories, and your entire conscious existence into the freezing dark. You are never safe. You are entirely, perpetually at the mercy of the abyss. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of your room and fully absorb the terrifying reality of the abyss beneath our feet is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of macroscopic information. We walk through our lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that order is the default, intended state of reality. We inherently believe that information naturally seeks to organize itself into stable, enduring structures, and that the universe actively supports the creation of complex biology. We demand that the cosmos be a reliable, solid container for our data, assuming that our physical form is a permanent, secure vault granted to us by the laws of physics. We treat chaos as an external, temporary threat, a rare anomaly that occasionally disrupts the peaceful, structured progression of our lives. But the violent, boiling foundation of reality reveals a breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling truth. The cosmos actively proves that absolute, structureless chaos is the true, permanent, and default state of existence. Order, logic, and physical structure are the anomalies. The highly organized, beautifully intricate information that constitutes your consciousness and your biological body is not native to the deep universe. It is a desperate, incredibly rare rebellion against the natural, unyielding physics of the dark. Information, in its most profound, macroscopic form, is a magnificent, temporary act of defiance. It is a highly localized, fiercely protected arrangement of data that forces the roaring, boiling quantum foam to temporarily hold a recognizable shape. The universe does not inherently want you to exist. The march of entropy and the violence of the fundamental void actively, constantly attempt to violently tear your organized information back down into the chaotic, meaningless noise of the foundation. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting rhythm of your breath and the incredibly fragile solidity of your own hands, that your existence is a breathtaking, ongoing statistical miracle. You are not a permanent fixture of reality. You are a beautiful, temporary tension. You are a majestic, highly organized song playing perfectly over the deafening, eternal static of the microscopic abyss. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for an ultimately solid, safe universe. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that you are standing on firm, dependable ground. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute physical vulnerability. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the fragile, temporary architecture of your life is incredibly precious precisely because it is built entirely upon pure, unyielding chaos. You are a localized, magnificent masterpiece of data, actively defying the screaming void, beautifully and perfectly balancing on the very razor's edge of the infinite, structureless dark. Let the heavy, suffocating weight of the infinite dark slowly begin to recede. Allow the terrifying imagery of unyielding pixels, boiling voids, and the screaming mathematical collapse of space-time to quietly wash over you and then gently drift away into the shadows. We have spent so much time staring directly into the absolute, naked extremity of the universe, obsessively measuring the unfathomable ways in which the physical world actively defies our human logic, that we have forgotten how to simply breathe. We have allowed the sheer, paralyzing scale of the microscopic abyss to convince us that our existence is a tragedy of illusions, a fragile hallucination clinging desperately to a raging storm of quantum probability. But as we rest here, in the velvety, quiet stillness of this final realization, the deep, existential dread must finally begin to shift. It must transform. The paralyzing fear of our own fundamental emptiness and the chaotic nature of our foundation is slowly, beautifully replaced by a deep, unshakable, and profoundly heavy peace. We are finally forced to confront the ultimate, majestic truth of our existence. The fact that reality is built upon an unreadable, chaotic foundation is not a source of terror, but the absolute, beautiful source of our grace. We must stop looking at the deep, microscopic unknown as a hostile territory that has successfully resisted our intellectual conquest. We must abandon the arrogant, uniquely human obsession with absolute comprehension, the desperate, exhausting need to mathematically dissect every single layer of existence until the entire cosmos lies entirely exposed, sterile, and lifeless on an operating table of our own design. Instead, we must learn to look down into the invisible, boiling depths of the quantum foam and see it for what it truly is, a majestic, untamable, and aggressively beautiful wilderness of raw potential that we are incredibly, miraculously lucky to be completely shielded from. There is an immense, heavy comfort in knowing that the universe keeps its deepest, most profound secrets securely locked away in the dark. The cosmic firewall, the catastrophic collapse of gravity and light at the Planck scale, the mathematical infinity that shatters our highest equations. These are not failures of human science. They are acts of profound cosmic mercy. The universe has drawn a hard, impenetrable boundary at the absolute bottom of reality, specifically to ensure that the delicate, beautiful poetry of the macroscopic world can safely exist without being consumed by the deafening roar of the underlying machinery. Imagine standing in the grand hushed hall of an ancient, beautifully resonant theatre, listening to a sweeping, heartbreaking symphony. The music fills the air, evoking profound emotion, memory, and a deep sense of human connection. To demand to see the Planck length, to demand to fully understand the boiling quantum chaos beneath reality, is akin to tearing up the wooden floorboards of the theatre, violently smashing the delicate instruments, and ripping the strings apart under a microscope just to find the exact microscopic origin of the sound. If you destroy the instrument to find the music, you are left with nothing but broken wood, snapped wire, and absolute silence. The universe operates on this exact same majestic principle. We do not need to understand the violent, abstract mechanics of the strings to be beautifully, flawlessly woven into the music. We do not need to read the chaotic, pixelated source code to be the magnificent, breathing program. The ultimate secret of the cosmos is that the illusion of solidity, the smooth flow of time, and the organic warmth of nature are not malicious lies meant to deceive us. They are the finished masterpiece. They are the beautiful, intended result of the chaotic engine running silently in the freezing dark beneath our feet. To embrace the majestic unknown is to find the ultimate heavy liberation from the exhausting burden of human anxiety. We have been taught for generations that ignorance is a weakness, and that true peace can only be achieved through absolute control and total understanding. We view the impenetrable limits of physics as a terrifying reminder of our own smallness. But in the quiet dark, we realize that a universe without absolute limits would be a universe without structure, a formless, infinite void where nothing could ever truly hold a shape. We should not mourn the fact that our minds violently break down at the bottom of the world. We should instead find a deep, soaring joy in the fact that the universe is so vastly, incomprehensibly greater than our capacity to calculate it. The physical world is a bottomless well of mystery, forever protected from the arrogant, destructive reach of complete human understanding. We are allowed to live our lives surrounded by a profound, sacred magic that will never ever be fully explained away by the cold, sterile light of an equation. Release the desperate, white-knuckled grip on the fantasy of total cosmic mastery. Stop viewing your physical vulnerability and your inability to comprehend the quantum void as a terrifying flaw. Your biological blindness to the raging storm beneath you is your most sacred property. It is the divine filter that allows you to experience love, to create art, to feel the gentle warmth of the sun, and to find comfort in the steady rhythm of your own breathing. The very fact that your body and mind are completely incapable of processing the quantum foam is the exact reason you are able to process the breathtaking beauty of a quiet evening. You are a localized, highly organized miracle, an impossibly complex structure of information floating safely and perfectly above a roaring, unfathomable abyss. You are the statistical anomaly that beat the infinite odds, the localized pocket of peace that the chaotic universe somehow miraculously agreed to sustain. There is a profound, heavy comfort in knowing that you are exactly what you are supposed to be, an observer, safely insulated from the fire, experiencing the grand illusion in all of its magnificent, heartbreaking detail. When we quietly sit and consider the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information, we realize that meaning itself is entirely dependent on this beautiful, macroscopic illusion. The universe at the Planck scale is a roaring, infinite data stream of raw, unformatted binary code. It is entirely structureless, completely devoid of narrative, warmth, or history. Information at the absolute bottom of reality is nothing more than chaotic noise. But here, in the macroscopic realm, within the heavy, protective architecture of our biology and our planet, that chaotic data has been masterfully compiled. It has been layered, smoothed, and miraculously synthesized into the delicate, beautiful poetry of conscious life. Meaning does not exist at the bottom of the universe. Meaning only emerges at the top, in the grand, sweeping statistical averages that create the physical world we can actually touch and feel. We are the universe's way of organizing its own infinite chaos into a legible, beautiful story. If we were to attempt to bridge the unbridgeable scales and fully merge our consciousness with the boiling void, we would lose our meaning. We would become decoherent. We would fade back into the structureless entropy of the dark. Our inability to see the bottom of reality is the ultimate act of information curation. The universe keeps the noise locked away so that we can clearly hear the music. You must learn to find peace in the beautiful, delicate fragility of your macroscopic existence. Do not fight the illusion of solidity. Sink into it with profound gratitude. Feel the firm, dependable pressure of the mattress supporting your heavy body, and trust that the statistical miracle of the atoms will hold you safely through the night. Do not resent the smooth, flowing illusion of time. Let it carry you gently forward, unburdened by the tangled, shattered reality of the quantum web. We are the universe's most precious, highly guarded narrative. The walls of our reality are made of macroscopic averages and biological filters, built specifically to ensure that our fragile, fleeting light might burn with a singular, beautiful intensity, completely oblivious to the cold, infinite void raging just beneath the surface of the world. Look around the quiet, darkened space of your room tonight and see it not as a fragile hologram waiting to collapse, but as a magnificent, perfectly sustained sanctuary. Allow yourself to feel the breathtaking improbability of your own existence, not as a source of dread, but as a source of profound, heavy relief. You are not responsible for the chaotic, boiling engine of the cosmos. You do not have to hold the quantum foam together. The universe is carrying you. The abyss is down there, raging, boiling, and calculating the infinite. But you are safe up here, floating upon the beautiful, perfectly rendered surface of the deep. Embrace your localized reality as a sacred gift. Rest within the beautifully designed, impenetrable walls of our physical limitations, knowing that the cosmos has perfectly hidden its terrifying foundation so that you might simply exist in peace. Let the gentle, steady rhythm of your breathing be the only physical law you need to understand. Sink deeply into the heavy, comforting warmth of the dark. The universe will continue its violent, beautiful, and chaotic dance without demanding your comprehension, and you are permitted to simply close your eyes, safe and hidden within the magnificent, orderly illusion of the macro. Good night, and I will see you in the next video.